Okay, so we're going to look at 7 factors that influence our fabric and pattern choices. We're going to, don't think this spells a word. It really doesn't unless you're just into making up words for Webster, but DIFFBCP, I've never heard of that word, and I'm quite certain it does not exist. All right, so we're going to tell you what they stand for, and we're going to eliminate some that are not in this particular DVD because we've done other DVDs with them in them. But you do need to consider all 7 principles when you're putting fabric and pattern together. Part of it will be just kind of part of your personality, and others you'll have to learn. So we're going to start with drape, and drape we're going to talk about. The next thing we're going to talk about is impact. The impact that clothing has on other people, that is not in this DVD. That's really about personality. That's kind of your own journey, your own discovery. So we're going to put that down. So how about that? We're going to put that down. Fit, if you all know me at all, you know I'm a fanatic on fit. I think my whole world is fit. That's what I've dedicated my whole life to doing. But we've got free YouTube. We've got free public television. We've got all kinds of free information for you to learn and understand the concepts of fit. And if you don't know what this is, that's not a good thing. You need to understand what this is, and it will accomplish fit, just not on this DVD. Achieving great fit through muslins. Success from the start. All of those others. Take care of fit. All right, then we've got fabric, and we are going to cover those. So far, drape and fabric. Then we're going to talk about the balance, and what we need by that is the balance of the proportions of top to bottom. It's very important in an outfit to make sure that it's balanced, to make sure that it's the right scale for your body. We've got a book that does that beautifully. It's called Dress to Kill Gently. So we're not going to deal with that in this DVD, but balance is definitely a part, and it's very important. Then we're going to talk about color. I can't say enough about color. I think it's extremely important to have the right color on the right person's faces. I've taught classes over the years. I always look out, and sometimes immediately you see somebody who's just perfect. The color they have on is just perfect for them, and it's a home run. It's absolutely a home run. It doesn't mean we can't veer outside of color, for heaven's sakes. I remember one time to my mother, I said to her, "That just looks awful on you." That looks awful on you. I mean, she asked me. I didn't just volunteer it. She asked me. And I said, "It looks awful." And my mother was shorter, and she was limited by what she could wear because she was 5'2", and she had some extra weight on her. And I said to her, "That just looks awful." And she says, "Well, why do I care?" That was kind of a real take back for me. I said, "Well, because you do. That's just who you are. You care." And she said, "No." She says, "I'm going somewhere today with people who I love, and no one's going to judge me by what I have on. And when I'm in a situation, I'm going to wear what I love. And I know it looks terrible on me, but I like it." So I kind of taken that to heart, and I'm going to pass that on because I think that was great advice. So while I think the color is very important, you can't live your whole life. I know a customer that all she wears is orange. Orange, every day, orange. And I think to myself, I just don't think I would want to limit myself to one color. One color, just when there's so many, it just doesn't make sense to me. But again, your garment, your choice. And then this is, of course, is pattern, and we are going to talk about that, mixing the fabric and the drape and the patterns together. This is what we're really going to focus on. So we're going to start with drape. Drape is fascinating. I think I've just read so many studies about it over the years, and it's evolving because the #1 thing we can have in a fabric is drape. Drape for women makes us look our thinnest. It is, and think about this. There's knits and wovens. We're going to talk about this in a minute. We'll go through this process. But wovens have less drape than knits. Why do we love knits? Because they make us look thinner, and they are forgiving. Wovens are not near as forgiving. Wovens need much more structure. They need the darts. They need it to be correct. They need more structure than knits. And so what we love about knits is knits drape better. We're going to talk about why. We're going to do all that. But we have to recognize that the drape is the #1 thing we should be looking for in a fabric. Many of you have said, "I can't buy fabrics. I don't have any in my hometown where I live. I can't buy them online. I have to touch them." We're going to nix that because the world is yours if you can buy them online. There are so many online fabric sources now that we've got to learn to buy them online, which is another thing I want to teach you today. If I know the weight of a garment, the weight of the ounces, and if I know the fabric identification, there isn't any reason why I can't buy them online. And I'm going to go through. The only thing I would caution you is a polyester. And the reason a polyester is because polyester is that magical fiber that is morphed so many different ways, because they can take poly and make it duplicate anything in actual visualization. They can't in how it responds, and they can't in how it presses or how it sews, but they can duplicate the actual image of wool, silk, or anything else. All right, but that would be something you'd need to feel. But as far as the natural fibers and the cotton, you all know what cotton feels like. You know what wool feels like. Many of you can feel, you know that. So if I see a description that's a wool and so many ounces, I'm pretty much going to understand what that drape is going to be. All right, so let's start at the beginning of drape, and let's just understand a little bit about drape. The first thing I want to talk about is the nature of a woven piece of fabric. And we have the warp, and the warp is what's going to go vertical. And the way I always remember it is there's a warp and a weft, and the A is what goes up and down, and the weft is what goes across. So these studies and what they've tried to do with fabrics to make them more drapable, the goal is to make the fabric, to make the fiber as drapable as possible, because the better it drapes, the better it looks on a female, male, the better it sells, et cetera, et cetera. We want more drape in a garment. So what they've done is they've increased the tension of the warp yarns while leaving the weft yarns the same, and that has been highly efficient in getting the coefficient for drape to increase. And that is what we're seeing in today's fabrics. So for many of you, as you've stored fabrics over the years, and I keep saying, don't hold on to that stuff, don't hold on to that stuff, because we can take the same silk today that was around 10 years ago, and the silk of today is going to drape much better because they've increased these tensions and found out things about fabrics that they didn't know 10 years ago. So again, when I have the weft is usually the decorative yarn. It is the beautiful, you know, slub yarn. It's all of those. The beautiful yarns are usually the weft. The warp is simply what's holding everything together in place. Changing the tension of the weft did not yield out anything different in any of their experiments. Making it tighter, looser, none of that changed the drape. Now we're just talking about the drape. It was increasing the tension of the warp that actually made the difference, and so that's what they've done in today's fabrics. That warp has become more and more tightened as the wefts play the role of making that fabric more beautiful. All right, also when we deal with fabrics and we know the warp and we know the weft, I want to point out to you grain, because grain is important to decide when we pick a fabric. The title of this DVD is The Fabric Always Wins. In my opinion, we should take that fabric, we should hold it, touch it, utilize it, understand it, and then pair it with a pattern. It kind of shouldn't be done until I have the fabric. And I know a lot of times we have projects and we put them together, but it truly is when I get that fabric and really have some patience to get to know that fabric a little bit, that I'm ready to put it into the pattern and the best use for the fabric. Is it one-sided? Is it two-sided? What are my selvages? What are my drapes? What is the grain? Is there a grain? So that's why I want to talk about grain just briefly. What we know is that when we have grain that is parallel to the warp, we call that straight grain. And literally it is the warp thread that we are using as our grain. And that is the most reliable because, again, that warp yarn is kind of the base of the house. It's the foundation of the fabric. When we have a grain that we're then using that's going along in the direction of the weft, then that's called cross grain. Neither one is right or wrong. We're the designer now. We get to do whatever we decide we want to do, and we can do either one. A lot of fabrics today, I can go either way, but the weft usually is going to have more stretch than the warp, simply because the warp is our foundation. All right, then if I take and create a 45-degree angle to the weft or the warp, either one doesn't make a difference, that's what we know and love as bias. And what bias does is simply create an entirely different drape of that fabric that the weft and the warp could never do. So drape is important, drape is critical. Our grain affects drape. How we lay the pattern on the fabric affects how the garment will hang. In fabrics that have no warp and weft, there's no grain. In fabrics that have no warp and weft, there's no bias. Those fabrics would be our leathers. Our leathers. There is no grain in leathers. There is no grain in knits because they simply don't have a weft and they don't have a warp. You have to have those two in order to have a grain or cross grain. All right, when we are dealing with grain, why do we use grain in a top? We use grain simply because we want the shirt to look straight. If I'd made this shirt and not straightened up those stripes, it would probably not sell if I was trying to put it into a store, or certainly even if I wore it, somebody would think I'd really had a hard time that day. So I want to make sure my stripes are going straight. That's the only reason I use grain on the upper portion of the body. On the bottom portion of the body, if a garment is longer than 20 inches, then that grain will spin or turn. So I see a pair of pants, and if the grain is not straight on a pair of pants, what I know about that grain, what that leg is that it will turn. And so I don't want that. So grain is visual. Grain is for how the garment will hang. If it's over a certain number of inches, I think all along we're taught, oh no, it's got to be grain, it's got to be grain. When I'm laying out a top, I don't measure. I don't need to. You don't need to. You just simply need to make sure that they're going along with the fabric, or just primarily going vertical, up and down.